Forget everything you thought you knew about Roman doctors. We often imagine wise old men, respected scholars in white robes, healing the powerful. But the truth is far more shocking. Many of Rome's greatest doctors, men who cured emperors and saved lives, were actually slaves. Brilliant minds with knowledge far ahead of their time. Yet they owned nothing, not even their own freedom. Imagine saving a ruler's life in the morning, only to be sent back to chains at night. This is the hidden story of Rome's enslaved doctors, and once you hear it, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. Why does this story matter? Because it exposes one of history's biggest paradoxes. Rome was a world power admired for its roads, its armies, its laws, and its medicine. But behind those medical breakthroughs were people who lived in chains. Their skills kept the empire alive, yet they had no control over their own lives. That if we forget their story, we miss the uncomfortable truth that progress can exist right beside oppression, and that even the brightest minds can be silenced by power. Understanding their struggle isn't just about the past. It's a reminder for us today of who gets credit, who gets remembered, and who gets erased from history. To understand the story of Rome's enslaved doctors, we first need to step inside the world they lived in. Picture the Roman Empire at its height. Bustling streets filled with merchants shouting prices, grand villas where the wealthy dined on, silver plates, and crowded arenas where gladiators fought for survival. Rome was powerful, wealthy, and advanced, but it was also built on the backs of millions who were not free. Slavery was everywhere. It wasn't hidden. In fact, it was the foundation of Roman society. Slaves worked in the fields, rowed the warships, cleaned the houses, and even entertained at banquets. And yet, among these millions of enslaved people were some of the sharpest minds the empire had ever known, men trained in the science of healing. Medicine in ancient Rome wasn't as primitive as many imagine. Romans inherited knowledge from the Greeks, improved it, and spread it across their empire. Surgical tools made of bronze and iron, herbal remedies carefully prepared, even theories of anatomy. They were centuries ahead of their time. But here's the twist. Much of this advanced care didn't come from free citizens. It came from enslaved doctors, men brought from Greece, Asia Minor, and beyond, whose only value to their Roman masters was the knowledge in their heads and the skill in their hands. So when an emperor fell ill, or a senator's child had a fever, these enslaved physicians were summoned. They were trusted with lives at the very top of society, even while their own lives were controlled by someone else. It's a contradiction that feels almost impossible today. Doctors with the power to save Rome's rulers, yet powerless over their own fate. And that's where the true drama begins, because these men weren't just healers. They were symbols of how Rome used brilliance and cruelty side by side. Their presence forces us to ask, what does it really mean to be civilized, if civilization is built on chains? So where did these enslaved doctors come from? The answer takes us back to Greece, the birthplace of philosophy, science, and yes, medicine. Long before Rome rose to power, Greek physicians like Hippocrates had already laid down the foundations of medical practice. They studied the human body, experimented with treatments, and began to see illness not as punishment from the gods, but as something that could be explained and treated by science. When Rome conquered Greek cities, they didn't just take land and treasure. They took people. Among the captives were philosophers, teachers, artists, and doctors. Many of these Greek physicians suddenly found themselves transported from respected careers into the harsh reality of slavery under Roman masters. Imagine being a learned scholar one day, and the next, being treated as property, your entire identity reduced to a skill your captors could exploit. But Romans were practical people. They recognized talent when they saw it. A slave who could heal wounds, stop infections, or save a child from fever was far more valuable than one who worked in the fields. So these captured doctors were not sent to dig trenches or row ships. They were placed in the villas of the wealthy, in the barracks of soldiers, and even in the palaces of emperors. In some cases, wealthy Romans would buy young Greek boys showing promise in studies, train them in medicine, and raise them as enslaved physicians within their households. The irony is striking. Knowledge that once symbolized freedom and wisdom in Greece became a chain in Rome. These men were celebrated for their skill, but only as long as it served the power of their owners. And yet, this is how medicine spread across the empire. Through these enslaved physicians, Roman families gained access to Greek medical wisdom. Techniques, remedies, even philosophies of health flowed through their hands. Without them, Roman medicine would never have advanced so quickly. The paradox is clear. The very empire that prided itself on progress depended on the forced labor of men who embodied that progress. This origin story sets the stage for everything that followed. Because as Rome expanded, so too did the demand for these enslaved healers. Their presence became woven into daily life, from the battlefield tents of wounded soldiers to the luxurious homes of senators. They were indispensable, and yet still invisible in the eyes of society. Now that we know where these enslaved doctors came from, the real question is, what was life like for them inside the Roman world? For many, it was a strange mix of privilege and captivity. Unlike slaves who worked in mines or fields, doctors often lived inside their master's household. They were given decent clothes, proper food, sometimes even a small room of their own. They had respect within the walls of the house, because the health of the entire family could depend on them. But make no mistake, they were still slaves. They could be bought, sold, or punished at any time. No matter how many lives they saved, they were never truly free. Imagine treating your master's child for a deadly fever, staying up all night to keep them alive, and the very next morning, being ordered to fetch water or clean floors, as if your genius meant nothing. Their days were filled with contradictions. In the morning, they might stitch a soldier's wounds after battle or prepare herbal remedies for the sick. By afternoon, they could be summoned to a banquet hall, not to eat, but to stand ready in case a guest fell ill. Some masters paraded their enslaved doctors as symbols of wealth, bragging that their household had a Greek physician on hand, just like they boasted of owning fine horses or expensive jewelry. The pressure on these doctors was immense. A mistake could cost them not just their patient's life, but their own safety. Success brought no reward beyond survival, while failure could mean brutal punishment. Even when they were praised, the praise was hollow, because it never lifted the weight of slavery from their shoulders. And yet, despite these chains, their influence spread. Roman families relied on them. Soldiers trusted them. Even emperors depended on them. They lived in bondage, but their knowledge gave them a strange kind of power. The power to heal, the power to preserve life, while having no power over their own. Here's where the story becomes almost unbearable in its irony. These enslaved doctors, men treated as property, were often the very people called upon to heal Rome's most powerful citizens. Think about it. An emperor could summon a doctor at any hour. Senators, generals, and wealthy elites depended on their skill. A single mistake could shift the balance of politics, armies, or even the empire itself. And yet, the man holding that responsibility, the one who saved an emperor's life, might return afterward to a cramped servant's room, with no freedom, no recognition, no voice in the very world he had preserved. Imagine standing in the marble halls of power, applying your medical knowledge to calm a fever or stitch a wound, while guards and nobles looked down at you, not as a genius, but as a slave. That was the cruel paradox these doctors lived every day. Their hands carried the knowledge of Hippocrates. Their minds held secrets of healing unknown to most Romans. And still, they could be sold at a market like livestock. Some masters grew so dependent on their physicians that they treated them with unusual respect. A trusted doctor could almost seem like part of the family. Almost. But that almost was everything. No matter how many lives they saved, the chain of ownership was never broken. One wrong word, one unfortunate outcome, and all respect could vanish in an instant. And yet, the empire's survival rested partly in their hands. The lives of emperors and generals, the very men who decided Rome's fate, were preserved by those who themselves had no say in their own. Rome's doctors lived a double existence, saviors in the moment, slaves in the aftermath. It's a contradiction that forces us to ask, how can true brilliance shine when it's trapped inside chains? So what happened to the knowledge and contributions of these enslaved doctors? Did history remember them or erase them? The truth is complicated. Some enslaved physicians eventually earned their freedom. A few even became famous, like Galen, whose medical writings shaped Europe and the Islamic world for centuries. But most remained nameless, their brilliance absorbed into the glory of Rome, their individual identities lost. Their discoveries, techniques for surgery, herbal treatments, methods for diagnosing illness, survived, but their names did not. Think about that for a moment. Every time a Roman child recovered from a fever, every time a wounded soldier returned to the battlefield, it was because of these men. Their work kept families alive, sustained armies, and even prolonged the reigns of emperors. Yet when history was written, it rarely spoke of the enslaved doctor who made it possible. Instead, the credit went to Rome itself. Still, their legacy is hidden in plain sight. The surgical instruments unearthed by archaeologists, the medical texts preserved. Through the centuries, the very idea that medicine could be studied and advanced, much of this passed through the hands of enslaved healers. Without them, Roman medicine might have remained far more primitive. And perhaps this is the greatest injustice of all. Their knowledge outlived them, but their stories were buried. They were geniuses who shaped the future of healing, but the world chose to remember the empire, not the enslaved minds who made its progress possible. This is the paradox at the heart of their legacy. Freedom was denied to the men who gave life to others. And yet, through their skill, they quietly shaped the world we live in today. And here lies the most shocking truth of all. Imagine this: an enslaved doctor, a man whose knowledge could mean the difference between life and death, being dragged from his small chamber in the middle of the night. He is rushed into the palace of the emperor. Soldiers stand aside as he enters the marble hall, the weight of Rome's future pressing on his shoulders. The ruler of the empire lies before him, burning with fever. With calm hands and a brilliant mind, he prepares remedies, mixes herbs, and stays through the night. Slowly, the fever breaks. By morning, the emperor is alive, and Rome itself is safe from chaos. The doctor has saved not just a man, but an empire. And what is his reward? Chains, a return to his master's house. No honor, no freedom, no legacy, only silence. This is the cruel irony of history. The very men who saved Rome's leaders, who preserved its power and stability, were denied the one thing they deserved most: freedom. They were healers of emperors, yet prisoners of empire. So what became of these enslaved doctors once Rome began to change? Did their stories end in silence? Or did their knowledge echo through time? Some of them, through years of loyalty and service, were eventually granted freedom. Roman law allowed, for manumission, the legal release of a slave. A wealthy master might reward a physician who had saved his life by granting him liberty. These freedmen could then set up their own practices, take on students, and even earn respect in Roman society. For a few, it was a second life, proof that knowledge could sometimes break chains. But for most, that freedom never came. Their names were forgotten, their stories erased. History, written by the victors, remembered the empire, the emperors, and the battles, but not the enslaved healers who made survival possible. The irony is painful. Their discoveries and treatments lived on, passed from generation to generation, while their identities dissolved into shadows. Yet, their impact is impossible to deny. Many of the medical writings preserved in Rome, herbal remedies, surgical procedures, even early understandings of anatomy, were filtered through the work of enslaved doctors. When Galen, one of Rome's most famous physicians, built his theories, he stood on foundations laid by countless unnamed healers. Their invisible hands shaped the very framework of medicine that Europe and the Middle East would rely on for centuries to come. And beyond medicine, their story leaves us with a powerful reminder about humanity. It shows us that genius can bloom anywhere, even in chains. It shows us that progress often hides cruelty in its roots. Rome's glory was not just built by emperors and generals. It was sustained by enslaved men whose names we will never know, but whose knowledge still touches the modern world every time a doctor heals a patient that in the end. Their true legacy is not written on monuments or carved into marble statues. It is written in the survival of human life. The fevers cooled, the wounds healed, the breaths saved. That is the inheritance they gave us, even if history refused to speak their names. So what do we take away from the lives of Rome's enslaved doctors? On one hand, their story is heartbreaking. Men of brilliance and compassion, reduced to property, denied the dignity they gave to others. They saved emperors, generals, and children, but they could not save themselves from chains. On the other hand, their story is a reminder of resilience. Even in bondage, they chose to heal. Even when denied freedom, they gave life. Their knowledge outlived their names. Their skills survived empires. And that tells us something powerful. Humanity's progress is often written not by those in thrones, but by those history tried to silence. And so the question falls to us: how should we remember them? As slaves? As doctors? Or as both? The brightest proof that genius can be chained, but never destroyed. Because every time we step into a hospital today, every time a life is saved by medicine, a small part of that legacy still breathes. And maybe, just maybe, the true measure of civilization isn't in its wealth or power, but in how it treats the minds that carry its future.